It was a chilly morning, and the small diner on the corner of Maple Street was just beginning to buzz with life. Emma, a young waitress with a warm smile and a heart full of kindness, tied her apron and got to work like she always did. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, and regulars were settling into their favorite booths, ready to start the day. For Emma, it was just another shift, until something unexpected caught her eye. Through the large glass window, she noticed a scruffy, thin dog wandering near the dumpster out back. Its ribs were showing, and it looked like it hadn't eaten in days. Emma's heart sank. She couldn't stand to see anyone, or anything, suffer. During her break, she grabbed some leftover bacon and a slice of bread from the kitchen, stepped outside, and knelt beside the stray dog. It hesitated at first, but the hunger was too strong, and soon it was wolfing down the food while wagging its tail gratefully. Emma smiled, feeling a small warmth in her chest. What she didn't realize was that someone was watching. Her boss, Mr. Carter, was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed and his face set in a deep frown. "Emma," he barked, startling her. "What do you think you're doing? Feeding strays on my property? That's not what I'm paying you for." Emma tried to explain, her voice steady but her heart racing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but it was just a bit of leftover food." The poor thing looked so hungry. But her words fell on deaf ears. Mr. Carter had always been strict, more focused on the bottom line than on acts of kindness. "This is a business, not an animal shelter," he snapped. "If you've got time to waste, you're clearly not taking your job seriously. You're fired." Emma froze, the weight of his words sinking in. Fired? For feeding a stray dog? She couldn't believe it. With her mind racing and her eyes stinging, she untied her apron, handed it to Mr. Carter, and walked out, the stray dog still lingering nearby as if sensing her distress. What happened next was something Emma never saw coming. Just as she stepped onto the sidewalk, wondering how she was going to explain this to her family, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver rolled down the window, and Emma's breath hitched. Inside was a man who looked oddly familiar, his eyes kind but filled with curiosity as he gestured for her to come closer. "Excuse me," he said. "I think I just saw what happened back there. Can we talk for a moment?" Emma glanced back at the diner, where Mr. Carter was still glaring at her, and then at the man in the car. Her heart pounded as she hesitated. Who was he? And what could he possibly want with her? Little did she know, this encounter was about to change her life forever. Emma hesitated, clutching her coat tightly as the chilly breeze bit at her skin. The man in the car seemed calm, but there was an air of mystery about him that made her wary. Her mind raced with questions. Was he a customer from the diner? Had he overheard the argument with Mr. Carter? Or was this just some strange coincidence? She took a cautious step closer, and the man leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. "I don't mean to alarm you," he began, his voice steady and reassuring, "but I couldn't help noticing what you did back there. Feeding that dog, standing up for something even when it cost you. That's rare. People don't do that anymore." He glanced briefly at the stray dog, now sitting a few feet away, as if it, too, was part of this unexpected moment. Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. I just couldn't ignore it. "The poor thing was starving," she said softly, her voice still trembling from everything that had just happened. "But now I'm out of a job because of it." The man nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line as if he were weighing his next words carefully. "It's not fair," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Sometimes the right thing to do comes at a cost, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing." He paused, then extended his hand through the window. "I'm Jack. And I might have a way to help." Emma stared at his hand, her confusion deepening. She didn't recognize him, but there was something familiar about the way he spoke, like he understood her situation better than she did. Reluctantly, she shook his hand and managed a small, polite smile. "Emma." Jack's eyes lit up with recognition. "Emma," he repeated, as if the name meant something more to him than it did to her. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. I work with an organization that helps people like you, people who care, who act with compassion even when it's inconvenient or risky. We're always looking for individuals like that. Emma stared at the card, the bold lettering catching her eye, Kindness Collective Initiative. Beneath it was Jack's name and title, Director of Outreach. I don't understand, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Why me? I'm just a waitress who got fired for feeding a dog. Jack smiled faintly, his gaze steady. You're more than that, Emma. You showed courage when no one was watching, and that's exactly the kind of person we need. I can't promise you an easy road, but if you're willing to take a chance, I think you'll find it's worth it. Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of a door slamming drew their attention. Mr. Carter had stepped outside, glaring at Emma as he barked into his phone. She felt a pang of humiliation but quickly turned back to Jack. What are you saying? She asked, gripping the card tightly. Jack leaned in, his expression serious but hopeful. I'm saying that losing your job might be the best thing that ever happened to you. Emma felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity bubbling inside her. Could he be right? And what exactly was this Kindness Collective? As the stray dog nuzzled against her leg, she realized this might be her only chance to find out. Emma stood there, her mind racing as she turned Jack's business card over in her fingers. The name, Kindness Collective Initiative, felt oddly powerful, yet she couldn't fully grasp what it meant. Jack waited patiently, as if giving her time to process everything. The stray dog, now sitting at her feet, seemed to sense her unease and leaned gently against her leg, offering silent comfort. Emma's thoughts were a blur. One moment she was feeding a starving animal, and the next, her entire life had shifted. I don't even know what you're offering, Emma finally said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I mean, how can you be so sure on what you're looking for? Jack smiled, a small, knowing expression. Because I've been where you are. I've had to make choices that didn't make sense to anyone else. I've lost things I thought I couldn't live without, only to realize it opened the door to something better. But none of it happens unless you're willing to take a leap. Emma frowned, unsure whether to feel inspired or suspicious. And what exactly does this initiative do? She asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. Jack leaned back in his seat, his expression serious now. We find people who make the world a little better, people who act selflessly, even when no one's looking. Then we help them amplify that impact. We fund community projects, provide resources, and sometimes just offer a second chance to people who need it. He paused, his gaze steady. People like you, Emma. She wanted to believe him, but it all felt too surreal. And what's the catch? There's always a catch. Jack's lips twitched into a faint smile. No catch. Just hard work and a lot of trust. But I get it, you don't know me, and this probably feels strange. So, how about this? Take the card. Think it over. If you decide it's not for you, no harm done. He pulled out a small envelope from his glove compartment and handed it to her. But if you do want to give it a try, there's an event tonight. Everything you need to know is in here. Emma hesitated before taking the envelope, feeling the weight of his words and the decision in her hands. As she stared down at it, Jack gave her one last encouraging nod before pulling away. The sleek car disappeared down the street, leaving Emma standing in the cold, unsure what had just happened. She glanced at the diner. Mr. Carter was now pacing inside, waving his hands as he berated a junior waitress. The sight made Emma's stomach turn. She thought about her small apartment, her overdue bills, and the uncertainty waiting for her at home. The envelope in her hand felt heavier with every passing second. Meanwhile, the stray dog followed her as she began walking, its tail wagging despite its frail body. Emma looked down at the animal, feeling an odd sense of connection. Was this the moment she'd look back on one day as the turning point? Or was it all just a mistake waiting to happen? With no clear answers, she opened the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a simple invitation with an address and a time, 7 p.m. that evening. Beneath it, in Jack's handwriting, were 3 words that sent chills down her spine: "You're not alone." As the clock ticked closer to 7 p.m., Emma's nerves felt like they were on fire. She had spent the entire afternoon debating whether she should go to the address Jack had given her. The invitation seemed too mysterious, too vague, and yet something about it tugged at her. Maybe it was the way Jack spoke with such certainty, or the fact that her life as she knew it was already falling apart. What did she have to lose? By the time she left her apartment, the stray dog was still lingering outside her building. It had followed her home, curling up near the front steps as if guarding her from the world. Emma couldn't bring herself to shoo it away. Instead, she whispered a soft, "Wait here," before walking toward the bus stop, her heart pounding with every step. The address led her to an unfamiliar part of town, where old warehouses lined the streets, their windows glowing faintly in the evening light. She clutched the invitation tightly, her breath visible in the cold air as she approached the building. A faint hum of voices reached her ears as she neared the entrance, where a man in a black coat stood, checking names against a clipboard. "Emma," she said nervously, her voice barely audible. The man smiled and nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Welcome. They're expecting you." Expecting her? The words sent a chill down her spine. She stepped into the building, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. The space was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, industrial exterior. Strings of lights hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over a group of people gathered in the center. Tables were set up with displays, photographs, projects, and handwritten notes that seemed to tell stories of kindness and change. Emma scanned the room, feeling completely out of place. Everyone else seemed so confident, chatting easily with one another. Just as she was about to turn and leave, a familiar voice called out her name. "Emma!" Jack appeared from the crowd, his warm smile instantly putting her at ease. "I'm so glad you came." He gestured for her to follow him, leading her toward a quieter corner of the room. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity and unease. "It's the heart of the Kindness Collective," Jack explained. "Every person here has a story, just like you. They've faced challenges, made sacrifices, and stood up for what's right, even when it wasn't easy. Tonight is about sharing those stories and finding new ways to make a difference." Emma looked around, her eyes landing on a display featuring photos of a woman planting a community garden in a rundown neighborhood. Another table showcased a group of volunteers rebuilding homes after a flood. The stories were inspiring, yet they made Emma feel even smaller. "I don't belong here," she murmured. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression serious. "You belong here more than you know. You just haven't realized it yet." He nodded toward the stage at the front of the room. "There's someone I want you to meet." Before Emma could respond, the lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. A woman stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding the room. She began speaking, her words powerful and moving, describing how a single act of kindness had changed the course of her life. Emma listened, her chest tightening with emotion. The story felt eerily similar to her own, and as the woman finished, the audience erupted into applause. Jack leaned in close and whispered, "She started here, just like you." One small act of compassion led her to something she never imagined. "That could be you, Emma." As the woman stepped down, Jack turned to Emma. "Are you ready to take the next step?" Emma's pulse quickened, her mind racing. Whatever was happening here felt bigger than anything she had ever known, and it terrified her. But it also felt like an opportunity she couldn't ignore. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the room went silent again. The stray dog from earlier had somehow found its way inside, standing at the edge of the crowd, its eyes fixed on Emma. The entire room turned to look at her. Emma froze, her heart pounding as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. Every choice she had made seemed to lead to this point, but she still didn't know what would happen next. The room fell into an eerie silence, every pair of eyes shifting between Emma and the stray dog standing at the edge of the crowd. Emma's breath hitched as the animal took a hesitant step forward, its thin frame illuminated under the warm lights. It wasn't just the sudden appearance of the dog that caught her off guard, it was the way it moved, almost as if it had been searching for her all along. Is that your dog?" someone from the crowd whispered, breaking the silence. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but the truth was, she didn't know how to answer. The dog had followed her from the diner to her apartment, and now here. There was no logical explanation for how it could have found this place. She felt her face flush as the attention of the room bore down on her. Jack stepped forward, a curious expression on his face. "It seems like this little one has something to tell us," he said softly, crouching down to meet the dog's gaze. The animal wagged its tail weakly but didn't move any closer. Jack turned his head toward Emma, his tone gentle but firm. "Emma, this dog chose you for a reason. Maybe it's time you figured out why." Emma felt her pulse quicken, the weight of his words sinking in. "I don't understand," she whispered. "It's just a stray. I fed it once. That's all." Jack stood, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he were piecing together a puzzle. Sometimes, it's the smallest moments that carry the biggest meanings. But this feels like more than a coincidence. Before Emma could respond, a loud crash echoed from the back of the room, startling everyone. A man burst through the doors, his face flushed with urgency. "Jack," he called out, his voice sharp with panic. "We've got a situation." The energy in the room shifted instantly. Jack's expression darkened as he walked quickly to meet the man, exchanging hurried words too quiet for Emma to hear. The stray dog whined softly, pressing itself closer to her leg, as if sensing the growing tension. The other guests whispered among themselves, their eyes flickering with concern. Emma hesitated before stepping closer to Jack. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice unsteady. Jack turned to her, his face grim but calm. "There's been an incident at one of our projects," he said. "A shelter we support was vandalized tonight. Supplies destroyed, windows smashed. We think it was targeted." Emma's stomach dropped. "Targeted? Why would someone do that?" Jack shook his head. "Not everyone likes what we're doing here. Helping people, animals, communities, it threatens those who thrive on selfishness or control. Sometimes, kindness shines too brightly for others to ignore, and they lash out." The room buzzed with tension as volunteers began organizing supplies and making calls. Emma felt overwhelmed, the enormity of the situation pressing down on her. She wanted to help, but she wasn't sure where to begin. Then her eyes fell on the stray dog, still at her feet, its soulful gaze locked on hers. In that moment, an idea struck her, something wild and impossible, but maybe exactly what was needed. She turned to Jack, her voice trembling but resolute. "What if the dog isn't just here for me? What if it's a sign? Something bigger, something we're supposed to pay attention to?" Jack's eyes widened, and for the first time, Emma saw a flicker of uncertainty in his usually composed demeanor. "What are you saying?" he asked. Emma hesitated, feeling the weight of her words. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I think this dog might be connected to all of this, somehow. And if we figure out why, it might change everything." Jack stared at her, his expression unreadable. The room around them buzzed with activity as the crisis unfolded, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was at the center of something much larger, something she was only beginning to uncover. Emma stood frozen as Jack studied her, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The stray dog nudged her leg gently, as if urging her to act. Whatever was happening felt far beyond anything she could have imagined, but deep down, she knew she couldn't walk away now. Jack finally nodded, a flicker of trust crossing his face. "All right," he said. "Let's follow this through." As volunteers worked to address the vandalism at the shelter, Emma and Jack focused on the dog. They decided to take it to a quiet room in the building to figure out what it might reveal. The dog, though timid, seemed cooperative, sitting calmly as if it understood the importance of the moment. Jack pulled out a small scanner, a device Emma hadn't seen before, and explained it was used to check for microchips in animals. "It's a long shot," he said, passing the scanner over the dog's neck. "But sometimes strays aren't what they seem. Emma watched nervously as the device beeped, signaling a match. Jack's eyebrows shot up, and he quickly connected the scanner to a nearby laptop. The room was silent except for the sound of keys clicking. After a few moments, Jack let out a low whistle. "This isn't just any stray," he said, turning the screen toward Emma. Displayed on the screen was a detailed profile from an animal rescue database. The dog had been part of a high-profile adoption program for veterans struggling with PTSD. Its name was listed as Buddy, and it had been placed with a retired soldier named Mark Davidson 2 years earlier. But what caught Emma's attention was the bold, red text beneath the profile, "Missing for 6 months. Owner presumed deceased." Emma's stomach twisted. "Presumed deceased," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack frowned. "It says Mark Davidson went missing around the same time as a house fire in his neighborhood. They never found a body, but they assumed he didn't make it. And Buddy, somehow, he ended up on the streets." Emma stared at the dog, Buddy, her heart aching for the journey it must have endured. "But why did he come to me?" "Why now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before Jack could answer, the door burst open, and one of the volunteers rushed in. "Jack! You're not going to believe this," she said, her face pale. "We just got a call from the shelter. Someone left a note behind, claiming responsibility for the vandalism. They mentioned the name Mark Davidson." Emma's heart raced as the pieces began falling into place. "What if Mark isn't dead?" she said suddenly. "What if he's been trying to stay hidden? Maybe Buddy escaped, and now someone's using him to send a message." Jack looked at her, his expression sharp with realization. If Mark's alive, he might be in danger. And Buddy could be the key to finding him. Emma felt a surge of determination. "Then we need to act fast." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Using the information from Buddy's microchip and the note left at the shelter, Jack and Emma worked with the local authorities to trace Mark's last known movements. Every clue seemed to lead to dead ends, but Emma refused to give up. She couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy had come to her for a reason. Finally, just as dawn broke, they received a call. A man matching Mark's description had been spotted at an abandoned warehouse outside the city. Emma insisted on going with Jack and the authorities, Buddy by her side. As they approached the warehouse, Buddy began to bark and pull at his leash, his excitement unmistakable. Inside, they found Mark, alive but weak, hiding after months on the run. He explained how he had uncovered illegal activities involving a powerful group, which had led to the fire that destroyed his home. He'd been trying to gather evidence ever since, but the group had tracked him down, forcing him into hiding. Buddy's escape had been unintentional, but Mark believed the dog's return was a sign that it was time to fight back. Emma felt a wave of emotion as Mark embraced Buddy, the reunion bringing tears to everyone's eyes. But just as relief washed over her, a sudden realization struck her, a detail from the shelter note that hadn't made sense earlier. It wasn't just about vandalism. It was a warning, "We're always watching." Emma turned to Jack, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. "This isn't over, is it?" Jack shook his head, his face grim. "Not yet. But now we know who we're up against. And we're not backing down." As Emma watched Buddy nuzzle against Mark, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She might have been just a waitress a day ago, but now she was part of something much bigger, something worth fighting for. In the weeks that followed, things began to shift for Emma in ways she never could have imagined. The days of working long shifts at the diner felt distant, a part of her life she was slowly leaving behind. The moment she had stepped into that room with Jack and the stray dog, her life had taken a turn she couldn't ignore, and now, with Mark safe and the truth out, everything was beginning to make sense. With Mark's help, the authorities managed to uncover the criminal organization behind the illegal activities he had been investigating. The group was dismantled, and many lives were changed for the better. But Emma knew the story didn't just end there. The real change had started with a single act of kindness, feeding a stray dog. As for Buddy, the dog that had brought them all together, he became a symbol of hope. Mark and Buddy were reunited, and the bond between them grew stronger every day. Emma, too, found herself thinking about that bond, how something so small, so seemingly insignificant, could lead to something so much bigger. She had learned that sometimes, it wasn't the grand gestures that changed lives, it was the quiet moments of empathy, the willingness to take a chance when no one else would. Jack continued to support Emma, offering her resources through the Kindness Collective initiative. Emma now helped organize community events, contributing to local causes and volunteering her time. She found herself working alongside people who had the same vision, to make the world a better place, one small act at a time. The diner, though, was a chapter Emma was ready to close. She stayed in touch with her old coworkers and checked in on the new waitress who had replaced her, but Emma knew she had found her true calling. Helping others, just as she had done with Buddy, had become her purpose. The unexpected events that had unfolded taught her that she was capable of more than she ever thought possible. A few months later, Emma stood at the front of a community meeting, sharing her story with a group of volunteers. She spoke about the power of kindness, the impact of believing in others, and how one small decision can change the course of a life. Her voice was steady, filled with conviction. As she looked around the room, she saw faces filled with hope, eager to make a difference. It wasn't just about the dog or Mark anymore. It was about all of them, people coming together to fight for what was right. Emma smiled as she spoke, knowing she had found her place in the world. And in that moment, as she looked at the faces of those who were now part of her story, she realized the truth of what she had learned. Kindness wasn't just a moment. It was a movement. And sometimes, the most unexpected moments, the most surprising encounters, could lead to the most profound changes. As she finished speaking, a sense of peace washed over her. This was just the beginning. The ripple effects of compassion and courage would continue to spread, one small act at a time, forever changing lives, and Emma, too, would never be the same.